This is part one of a two-part series on the history of the Tamil struggle, based on the book Liberation Tigers and Tamil Eelam Freedom Struggle by Anton Balasingham, published in 1983. We begin here. The Portuguese arrived in Ceylon in the 1600s. They find two different nations from a very ancient period who have divided between them the possession of the island. First, the Sinhalese, inhabiting the interior of the country in its southern and western parts, and secondly, the Tamils, who possess the northern and eastern districts. These two nations differ entirely in their religion, language, and manners. They enter into treaties and fight battles with the natives. Finally, in the Battle of 1619, they conquer the Tamil kingdom by defeating King Sangali Kumaran. The Dutch arrive and take over from the Portuguese in 1658, and then in 1802, the British take over control from the Dutch. However, the Kandyan kingdom was still not in their hands. In 1815, the British finally conquer the Kandyan kingdom. This is the document with the signature of the 11 Kandyan chieftains coming to an agreement with the British. Notice the use of Tamil letters. This is due to the last dynasty of Kandyan kings being of Tamil origin from Madurai. Having taken over the two kingdoms, speculators and entrepreneurs from England rushed to the newly conquered mountain areas and expropriated vast tracts of land by deceit from the Kandyan peasantry. Amidst this colonisation, the British decided to bring the two kingdoms into a unified structure in 1833, laying the foundation for the present national conflict. Even though the British appropriated land from the Kandyan peasantry, they were unable to convince the peasants to become wage earners in these new capitalist estates. By this point, the British had control of Tamil Nadu in India, and so they decided to conscript a massive army of cheap labourers. These labourers, who partly by their own poverty and partly by coercion, moved into this promised land to be condemned to an appalling form of slave labour. These Tamils came from Tinnevelly, Madurai, and Tanjore, and were from the poor oppressed castes. This army of recruited workers were forced to walk over 200 kilometres from their villages to Ramesaram, shipped to Mannar, and were again walked for over 250 kilometres from Mannar to the central highlands of Ceylon through impenetrable jungles where many thousand died of hunger. Using this army of slave labourers, the British set up the exploitative plantation economy. This is one of the most significant effects of British imperial rule. British colonialism also exploited the island's social formation for its needs during the 18 and 1900s. The existing Tamil social formation was constituted by a unique socio-economic organisation, in which feudal elements and caste system were tightly interwoven to form the foundation of this complex society. The notorious system of caste stratification bestows, by right of birth, power, privilege, and status to the high caste Tamils, the minority of whom, landowners and business elites, own the means of production and exploited the rest. The most exploited and oppressed sections are the so-called depressed castes, who eke out a banal existence under this system of slavery. The British facilitated a section of these high caste Tamils to adopt the English education system. The English imperialist masters encouraged the Tamils and provided them with an adequate share in the state administration under a notorious strategy of balance of power and of divide and rule. This later sparked the fires of singular national chauvinism. The privileges enjoyed by the English educated elites, the Tamil dominance in the plantation economy, and the spread of Christianity propelled the emergence of singular nationalism. This singular nationalism took the form of Buddhist revival in the early stages, which gradually assumed a powerful political dominance. The religious leadership attacked both the Tamils and European colonialists and spoke of the greatness of the Sinhalese Aryan race. This is a quote from Anagarika Dharmapala, who is renowned as a Buddhist leader of Sri Lanka. His stories are taught in the current Sri Lankan school system, and he has stamps released by India and Sri Lanka to commemorate his work on reviving Buddhism. The singular national chauvinism that developed from the Buddhist religious resurgence viewed the Tamil dominance in the state apparatus and in the plantation economy as a threat to national development, and as such, national antagonism articulated on an ideological level. Amidst this chaos, the British granted independence to Sri Lanka in 1948, with the Queen as the head of state. Motivated by their class interests, the national bourgeoisie collaborated with the British, accepted their constitution, and assumed power. Soon after the transfer of political power, singular national chauvinism reigned supreme, and the first cruel victims of the singular racist onslaught were the Tamil plantation workers. 1 million of this working mass, who toiled for the prosperity of the island for more than a century, were disenfranchised by the most infamous citizenship legislations in Sri Lankan political history. This robbed these people of their basic human rights and reduced them to an appalling condition of statelessness. The most vicious form of oppression calculated to destroy the national identity of the Tamils was the state-aided aggressive Sinhala colonisation, which began soon after independence and has now swallowed nearly 3,000 square miles of Tamil Eelam. This planned occupation of Tamil lands by hundreds of thousands of Sinhala people, aided and abetted by the Sinhala colonial regime in the areas where a huge mass of landless Tamil peasantry is striving for a tiny plot of land to toil, was aimed to annihilate the geographical entity of the Tamil nation and to reduce the Tamils to a minority in their own historical lands. The worst affected areas are in the Eastern Province. In Ampara district, the percentage of the Sinhalese population was 4.5% in 1946, but increased to a staggering 37.7% in 1983. In Trincomalee, in 1921, the Sinhalese made up only 3% of the population. By 1981, they make up 33.6%. In 1948, there were only 10,000 Sinhalese in the Eastern Province, which has swelled by 1977 to over 100,000 people. The national oppression of the Sinhala racist regimes soon penetrated into the sphere of language, education, and employment. The chauvinist Sinhala-only movement spearheaded by Mr. Bandaranaike brought him into political power in 1956. His first act in Parliament put an end to the official equal status enjoyed by the Tamil language and made Sinhala as the only official language of the country. The Sinhala-only Act demanded the proficiency of Sinhalese in the civil service. The Tamil public servants, deprived of the rights of increments and promotions, were forced to learn the language or leave employment. Employment opportunities in the public service were practically closed to Tamils. The racist discrimination against Tamils in employment by the present fascist regime can be studied from the statistics shown here. Education was the sphere that Sinhala chauvinism struck deeply to deprive a vast population of Tamil youth access to higher education and employment. A notorious discriminatory selective device called standardisation was introduced in 1970, which demanded higher marks from Tamil students for university admissions, whereas Sinhalese students were admitted with lower grades. This discriminatory device dramatically reduced the number of admissions of Tamil students and seriously undermined their prospects of higher studies. In our next episode, we will look at these oppressive regimes in more detail and understand how the Tamil people and politicians confronted them.